Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for attending the DATASOURCE Orchestra Network's educational series on MDM. This first part is around multi-domain MDM and how it relates to single domain MDM. So thank you so much for joining. Super quickly, want to just cover some logistics. We do have everyone muted. The content that we're going to present is about 40 minutes worth, and then we're going to save the last 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. Now you'll submit Q&A via the chat, and then we'll facilitate the questions from there. So feel free at any time that you have a question to enter it into the chat, and we'll take those questions at the end. Okay, let's go ahead and introduce our presenters. Next slide. Okay, first we're going to cover quickly a little bit about the two companies, right? What is our background and why are we experts in this space? So super quickly, DATASOURCE Consulting and EXL Company, we're a consulting firm that specializes in enterprise data management. And as many of you know, MDM is a huge component of that. So we divide the services that we provide into two separate categories. One of them is strategic services, where we do data governance, project plans that address people, process, technology, roadmaps, assessments, vendor tool evaluation, program management, etc. And then we also have the doers, the delivery people that are the data architects, the integrators, the data quality people, all those people that implement the solutions that we provide. So we've got the implementation side of the house. Now, with regard to Orchestra Network, we're going to go ahead and pause just for one quick second. We understand that you can see the panel here, so we're going to just close that panel really quick. Bear with us for just 1 second. Conrad, can you close that panel? Excellent. Very good. Okay, that should look much better for everyone. Thank you for bearing with us. Quickly, Orchestra Networks, they help organizations manage their most important data. They provide a software solution called EBX5, an MDM data governance solution that lets users manage, govern, and share any and all data assets. These would include master data, reference data, metadata, and because they know how to effectively manage the data and that they know that it requires many times much more than just a single point solution. So that's Orchestra Networks. Next slide, let me introduce our speakers. Okay, so today you'll be hearing from Solomon Williams. He is the Director of Enterprise Data Management Solutions from DATASOURCE Consulting, and Conrad Chuang, Director of Solution Strategy and Product Marketing. Next slide, please. Okay, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton over to Solomon Williams.
And thank you, Deborah, and welcome everyone to this first installment of our educational series on master data management. The agenda we're going to take you through today starts with what is master data management, what is master data, what is master data management, and then the heart of the subject, did multi-domain kill single domain MDM? The changing perspective of master data management, and what Deborah alluded to earlier, we're going to have a Q&A period. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so I guess, I'll start here. What is master data? So Solomon and I sat down, this is Conrad, and when we were going through this presentation, and we thought, why don't we come up with a couple of example domains of master data? So oftentimes, like a general description is a little bit, it can be hard to grasp, would you say, Solomon? So,
Indeed.
Yeah, so we thought about, put our heads together and we came up with a couple of different types of businesses. So you have a global car rental agency, and if maybe they're embarking on a business transformation. So what are some of those domains of master data they might be interested in? Well, one could be just the locations of the actual agencies where they have the cars. Cars, that's another thing. Currencies, the individual drivers or the accounts that they may do business with. Those kinds of things are all forms of master data. If we think about a quick serve restaurant franchisor, so somebody who may be franchising their business and may have a lot of franchisees that operate those quick serve restaurants. If they're looking at a different kind of business problem, perhaps improving their new product introduction, again, what are some of those domains they're going to be curious about? So things like the actual food, right? So menu items and menus, locations, again, might be something that they might be interested in. Currencies. So these are forms of both master and reference data. Finally, when we talk about someone like a HVAC manufacturer, and so these are folks that are making air conditioning systems, heat pumps, furnaces, if they're looking at launching a new product MDM and then improving the customer experience, what are some of those domains? Again, it could be product, right? So these are the actual heat pumps, for example. Their manufacturing facilities, the employees that they have, as well as other parties, such as distributors and maybe resellers. Again, currencies. So these are, when we thought about concretely, what are some of the domains of master data, some of those examples we could provide to you, we thought we would start there. And so, Solomon, I thought maybe then you could take us through a more general description of what master data is.
Happy to do so. So when we hear master data, I know a lot of things come to mind. And it can be fairly esoteric in a lot of ways to try to understand and get a grasp what master data is. So very simply, master data are those elements that are critical to the business of the organization. As an example, you may have a business transaction or a business event that occurs. Well, let's decompose that for a moment. That business event generally will require, has a product or service. It has a vendor, supplier, or perhaps a customer involved in either providing that service or acquiring that service. Generally, a location of where it takes place, whether it's brick and mortar or online. Those key components, the customer, the vendor, the product and or service that are involved, and the location, those are the master data elements that are going to be shared across the organization relative to that business event or transaction. Those groups of data elements are grouped into domains for ease of management. And so generally when we're speaking about master data management, you'll hear the phrase the customer domain, the vendor domain, the products or location domain. Or you may hear the party domain. And party is a more generic term for grouping together customers, vendors, suppliers, marketers, what have you. They can also be grouped under party. Now, what's important to note is that master data exists all throughout the organization. It lives in most of the line of business applications, whether you have a customer onboarding or a healthcare provider onboarding, in some of your manufacturers and service companies, supplier and vendor onboarding. Think about the different systems that are involved with those business functions. Each one of them contains master data for those operational systems. And each one of them is going to have its own way of storing it and its own way of managing it. So you may have it in different formats and different structures and the like. Conrad, would you like to add anything there?
No. In fact, that's a really good, interesting, and I would say general description of master data. So if this is master data, why don't we talk about what master data management is? And you know, when I think about master data management, or when we think about master data management from a vendor perspective, we look at it as it's a discipline, right? And it involves people, processes, and systems, or people, processes, and technologies, as you have here on the slide. So we think about ourselves as the technology, right? We're the solution. DATASOURCE, you guys are like the people, right? So you're the folks out there that are going to help the customers implement their solution. So what I find was kind of fun, and maybe it's not so fun for you, Solomon, but what I find fun about this webinar is the fact that you have both the people and the technology talking about master data management problems on this call. So it's not just one point of view. But do you have any other things to add about master data management in terms of the fact that it's a discipline, that it involves different pieces like people, processes, and technology? Or
well, just a small point, but no, you're right, and I think that this is what kind of makes this webinar unique, is because you do have the technology vendor and you have the SI, the system integrator, coming together to share that one view. And that does bring to bear, a much different perspective than you'll get in a lot of other places. The only thing I would do is really is just underscore some of the points that you made, is that when you're grasping or you're beginning that journey of what is master data management, and you're seeking buy-in from leadership or trying to get buy-in from your peers, is that understanding that master data management is a solution. It's not just a piece of technology, right? It's not just this thing that IT is going to install and everything is going to just work. It is really a solution that brings together both business and technology. So just to underscore that point.
And I completely agree. I mean, I know it sounds peculiar for a vendor to admit that, it's not just about buying a product, but buying a product without really considering the processes and people first can be quite fatal to your MDM program.
Indeed. No, I agree. And
so why are we doing this? Sorry, please continue.
No, not at all. No. So, and that's literally where I was going to go. Is so we talked about master data and master data management, but the important now, why do it? And I think now we're really getting into the heart of it, is because master data management, MDM, is a business solution to a business problem. And I think we'll just give folks a minute to sit back down, because I'm sure a lot of people fell out of their chair, because it's debated in many organizations that we work with, that master data management is believed, oh, that's IT, that's what IT is doing. No, master data management is a business solution that just happens to be enabled by technology, but without involving the people and the process, particularly on the business side, there is very little chance for that program to be successful. Now, master data management is also a process as well as a data solution. And very simply stated, business processes are what drive the business of any organization. Those business processes are enabled by people, which leverage applications, which leverage data. And without that full view to understand that this is how it has to come together, master data management is very much driven and should be very enabled by the business leadership. Now, the one other point is that, when you look at internal solutions to data problems, a lot of companies will say, you know what, before we go to buy a master data management tool, we're going to try and build this on our own. And what we typically find in a lot of clients, and it's pretty common throughout the industry, is that most of these internal solutions to the data problems, they're at odds with one another because they're not comprehensive, they're not complementary. And, that is some of the biggest challenges to trying to craft these homegrown solutions, is that everyone has a different view and they tend to challenge one another. And then at the very end of it, what is MDM really about? Really, very simply, it's about mastering consistency and accuracy. And I know, Conrad, you have a very interesting, and I love that anecdote around consistency and accuracy. Could you share that?
Yeah, so it's funny that you bring up consistency and accuracy. I once was talking to one of our clients, and he made the comment to me. He said, well, it's really about consistency. And I said, well, what about accuracy? And he's like, well, look, as long as everyone in the organization is wrong in exactly the same way, so we're all consistently wrong, we're going to be okay. Now, I don't know if I agree with him, because I would think that you'd probably want to have accurate addresses. But, I see his point, especially when you start talking about things such as hierarchies and reference data. If we're all using the same data values, we're all powering those applications and those processes with the same assumptions, we're going to be fine. But again, I'm not sure about the wholesale dropping of accuracy. I mean, what do you think, Solomon?
No, I agree. I think that it's a fundamental component, and I think that compliance organizations, risk organizations, and the leadership that are trying to make the best decisions possible would probably vote on the side of consistency and accuracy.
Yeah, I would say don't tell your auditors if you're not going to pay attention to accuracy. But so what are some of the problems that we see out there MDM solutions addressing? And so, the two big common ones that everyone's heard of, which is, I want to master my customers and I want to master my products. And those are the two biggest initial domains. And if you look at the marketplace, that's where a lot of these things started. So we have these huge customer databases that we want to go get a single view of customer from, or we got a product catalog they want to do omni-channel commerce around. And those are the starting points for a lot of the MDM vendors. But as time has gone on, there's some new thinking. I think you see it this year with the Gartner MQ, where they've merged the product and customer MQs together. And you're starting to see applications of MDM, more process-oriented ones that are focused on things like modernization or consolidation of multiple ERP systems. We happen to do a whole heck of a lot of financial accounting and financial hierarchies. I mean, so Solomon, any of the problems that you guys are seeing out there in DataSource land?
No, I would agree that it's very much similar. A lot of our clients are today, they're not so much speaking about 360-degree view of customer the way they did 2 or 3 years ago. Now they're talking about customer experience. They wanted to be able to understand the customer, how the customer engages, what the customer preferences are, and how to tie discrete events into one experience. We're also seeing a lot of migration to the cloud and cloud migration strategies. And if you, not to digress, but if you look at some of the best areas to begin a cloud migration strategy, one of the key enablers to that is that accurate, consistent data pool that can be shared across numerous different systems. And, master data management is key, and that is truly different than the vision of it was 2 or 3 years ago. And just to piggyback on, just one more point to that, I think that's really where Orchestra Networks really differentiates themselves, because they saw that, and that one product, excuse me, EBX5, that is capable of supporting multiple domains, capable of supporting data governance, capable of supporting the match, merge, and survivorship, the capability to distribute that information. I would think, as a system integrator, was one of the key factors in Orchestra Networks being in the leadership quadrant of the MQ this year, because that shift in perspective of MDM initiatives and MDM engagement, Orchestra Networks have been primed from the beginning to see that occurring. Would you agree?
I couldn't have said it better myself. And if anyone's interested in reading the actual MQ, we do have it on our website. It's at orchestranetworks.com. Well, with that, maybe we should get to the big question of the hour, or the 40 minutes, or the remaining 20 minutes that we have. So,
no,
Solomon,
absolutely.
Did you want to do the honors?
I'm happy to do so.
Yeah.
So, everyone, this is really the core of this webinar. Did multi-domain kill single domain MDM? Perhaps that question could be best answered, or a clue to that, if anyone out there remembers the Buggles. Does anyone remember Video Killed the Radio Star? This was a 1982 hit that was the first video ever shown on MTV. And what's cool about this, and there's a real big clue here, is where are we today? And as you think about this, did video, in fact, kill the radio star?
So if the pop culture reference is just a little too far for some of you, it's bridged too far, maybe we can go with a more classical reference about the blind man and the elephant. This is that old parable about the blind man walking around the elephant, touching different parts, and one guy's touching the tail, and he's like, it's a rope. Another guy's touching the tusk, he's like, it's a pipe. And they're arguing about, what it is. What is an elephant? Is it a rope? Is it a pipe? Is it a tree stump? Is it a fan? And it all has to do with their perspective about the elephant. And so when we think about that, So Solomon, when we think about that from the, value chain context, did you say?
Indeed, indeed. And again, that whole shifting of perspective, if the touching of the elephant was reminiscent of different organizations starting in different places with master data management, this is hopeful to underscore that, because initial MDM deployments at one time were very, very tactical. And what's meant by that is there was a vision of, well, you know what? I need to start with customer. You know, where does my customer domain come in at? And if you look at the business value chain from left to right, and this is a very generic, high-level model of a business value chain, customer master is where it was started, because customer is what drives the business. We want more customers. We want better insight to customers. So if you look at between sales and marketing and servicing, that's where the customer master came in. And then next, what you saw was, well, you know what? Now we need to know what products our customers are choosing. We want to have our customers have more availability, better insight to our product, and product availability. Here comes the product domain. And then building that product master allowed them to say, you know what? Now we need insight to where they're coming from, who are delivering these products for us. And that's where Supplier Hub comes in. And then the next logical step in Supplier, materials. So you can see that it was very, to a great degree, very tactical and somewhat myopic to a degree, that only the tactical need was being addressed. And then further domains were added. You would see the location master, and then comes the employee master. And then what comes at the very end was the hierarchy management component. And as you can see, just how they were brought on board, it was just very, very specific. But to some degree, you had to start where the funding was. So if sales and marketing was the business sponsor, sales and marketing were paying for it, we have to start small with the single domain, get that in place, have the business evangelize for you that this is awesome. How did we ever function without this? This is incredible. And then have that lead and drive other implementations and other business sponsors. Now, with the change, I mean, well, before I go any further, Conrad, do you have a perspective on that you'd like to share?
I do. So first off, I love this diagram you put together. And so when I think about the value chain, I always feel like it's a great way of kind of breaking down all the discrete portions of a business. You know, so you got the inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics. They're making the stuff. Sales and marketing is selling the stuff. And then servicing is dealing with, you know, the customer and supporting them, right? And then you have the overlay processes that cover everybody. And in a way, I actually feel like MDM, in a sense, is like one of these overlay processes. But what I love about these little boxes you put on the deck here on the value chain is that you're absolutely right. The initial deployments were very, very focused on particular portions of the value chain. And when we kind of pull back, we start to see perhaps the elephant take shape, or perhaps is this where you were going? That when we think about these different domains support specific business processes. So the customers, locations, products, and employees come together to support my order-to-cash process, or these same master data elements come together to support opportunity to order, or market to opportunity, or idea to market. And as you pointed out, across everything is hierarchy management. So is this kind of where you were going?
No, absolutely, and that's really the key. It's, you know, like the analogy, you can't see the forest for the trees. If you take a step back and you look at it broadly, you can say, you know what, this was multi-domain all along. We may have started with these individual domains, but then this is where we ended up.
Yeah, you know, and the funny thing about the forest for the trees statement is that I think a lot of times people hear that statement and they think you're making a value judgment, in the sense that the forest, or these multi-domain implementations that we see here, which is supporting a business process, that they're somehow superior to the individual tree. And I'm like, well, sometimes a tree is a tree, and the tree is very important because you got all the trees together to make a forest. So I personally think that it's really not one or the other, but maybe it is a spectrum or a continua in which you have single domain evolving into multi-domain.
Absolutely agree.
So perhaps that's the takeaway? Is that what you would say here?
I would. Master data management, and this is, again, typically when we're working with clients, is one of the things that we seek to drive out, is that master data management is about managing the relationships between the domains, particularly when you're looking at multi-domain master data management. If you stand up these individual domains and don't have an understanding or didn't perform the analysis or didn't do the due diligence to understand how these domains relate to one another, a significant portion of the value is lost. And managing those relationships between domains in the business process context, again, underscoring the fact that it's not just solely about the technical aspects of the data or the metadata that relates data to one another, the technical, the operational, and then the semantic metadata. It's more than that. It's looking at that data through the lens of the business process context will also significantly increase the value proposition of MDM. Your thoughts?
I completely agree. I mean, for us on the vendor side, when we think about the relationships, I sometimes think about it a little bit more discreetly, right? So I feel like when you are able to create a relationship between two domains of master data or reference data, you're creating a business rule. You're basically saying that if my customer has a relationship with zip code or the customer address, then what I'm saying is that I can't have any zip codes that exist that don't exist in my, say, zip code repository because you have this relationship that you built. And that network of relationships is really what creates consistency throughout the system. And then also, if you think about it from, if we were to pop back a slide, right? If we were to think about all these different domains in context of that business process, if they're all connected to each other, then we know that the information that's being used by the different domains, which may be common to the domains, so like if you're looking at employee to location and customer, the geographies would be a very common one. Then you can be sure that everybody is on the same page when they talk about maybe groupings or hierarchies. I mean, I've worked for more than one organization where you go to budget time and the sales department is thinking about North America as U.S., Mexico, whereas marketing is thinking about it as U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And, you have disagreements because people are using a different basis of analysis, and it just creates a lot of friction, and it requires some internal semantic reconciliation. I mean, I feel like MDM and RDM, it addresses a lot of those problems that we see. But did you want to talk about some of these, the validity of the perspectives? I mean,
Sure, absolutely. And with many things, not to get guru or anything like that, but many things in life, there's more than a single valid perspective. And MDM is no different. Many years ago on a different topic, and I think still to some degree, you have very heated debates in data warehousing space, Inman versus Kimball. And I've seen these things degrade to the point where, it's like, this is dangerous. But, and that's what we're trying to avoid, is that there is more than one single valid perspective of MDM. There is the domain-centric and there is the process-centric. Both are valid. But there's some key considerations when you're looking at it and how you begin. So, from a data scope perspective, in domain-centric, it's easy to know which domain you're looking at for a single domain. And process-centric, when you're looking at things like order to cash, opportunity to order, idea to market, market to opportunity, you're going to look more from a multi-domain perspective because, as we saw earlier, that these various domains support the business process. Another key consideration is implementation style. When you're building one single domain, it's easy to kind of figure out what style there is. That's not really difficult. When it's process-centric, you may have a multi-vector solution. And basically what that means is it may be not just your standard hybrid coexistence or consolidation. You may have varying velocities of data. You may have a shared authoring capability between the source system and the hub itself. As you discussed with the business rules, those business rules which are driven by the relationships between the domains may have an order of operations to them in that how the rules are applied at the various velocities at which data is coming into the hub. So it does, require a little bit more diligence, a little bit more upfront design when you're looking at these multi-vectored solutions. Cadence, the data, the latency, domain-centric. It's more often than not batch. It can be real-time as well, but it's very measured, it's very metered, and because it's just a single domain, it has, there's a lesser degree of complexity. But when you have process-centric, you're really leveraging more at that point a full integration fabric. And that full integration fabric could be a combination of microservices, macro services, objects, composite objects designed to bring data in, batch, scheduled batch. So that data, that integration fabric, if you will, is more of a requirement. And just to underscore this just a little bit more, when we work with, typically when we work with our clients and we're working with them, whether they're at the beginning of their MDM journey or they're in the midst of it, or we're doing a health check on their environment, or we're doing a discovery or an assessment, one of the things that we underscore very, critically is understanding that integration requirement. The data, of course, is, driving the master data, is driving, based on the data need, but if that data can't be shared, if that data can't be leveraged, if it can't be distributed effectively and efficiently, then again, the value is going to have a diminished capacity. So the integration is critical and the integration architecture and strategy is critical to any MDM solution. But when you're looking at domain versus process-centric, it takes on a bit of a different lens. Conrad, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, and we got to, and just going back to first principles, right? I mean, if MDM is about consistency and accuracy, because we both agree accuracy is quite important, but if it is really about consistency, then you're absolutely correct. If you can't distribute the data from the MDM hub into the downstream systems, or even the upstream systems who may be also downstream systems, if you're deploying in a hybrid mode, then you don't get that consistency. And the thing I might add to that is, don't overlook the people. Going back to people, processes, and systems. A lot of times, the big source of inconsistency is really because individuals don't have access to the information that would allow them to understand the information, maybe data definitions, business glossary, to get them on the same page in terms of meaning, but also they don't have access to the data values or the hierarchies, or maybe even some of the master data they need to do their job, so they can't get consistent. And so a big thing we think about is that integration and data distribution fabric that you're talking about isn't just about applying, it doesn't apply just to systems. It also applies to, I like to call them the consulted and informed portion of your RACI matrix. It's all those people that are never really ever going to govern anything, but they depend on the information out of the hub to do their day-to-day job. And if you get them using information from the MDM, you're going to have that, I would say, kind of political base to advance the agenda of having nicely mastered information throughout the organization. So, I'm looking at the slide, and, I want to get your feedback, Salma. Do you think we're missing one of the key considerations, which might be, or maybe it's buried in data scope, but it has to do with control? I mean, would that be a separate key consideration, or would you put that in control inside data scope? So, like, who's in the RACI matrix, or who's going to be responsible and accountable for mastering that information?
No, generally, as we approach different projects, particularly around master data management, it is a key component, and we tend to couch that inside the data governance function. which is critical to any MDM initiative. And I know that one of the things that, you know, at DATASOURCE we push and we try to educate is that you can do data governance independently of master data management, but you cannot do master data management independent of data governance. And that doesn't mean that it has to be a full, you know, very large, very muscular organization. But to your point, there has to be clearly defined roles of who owns the data from a data ownership and stewardship perspective. Who has the ability to make decisions around the data? So that data curation, if you will, that says, you know, I have these data elements that have come into the hub, we couldn't match them, so they're suspect. Well, who resolves that? And then if there's a conflict, if there's a disagreement, or if there's a non-alignment, who has the ability to make decisions? And that body of control, or data curation, or data custodian, I mean, we've run into a number of different terms and or different organizations that use it, but it all comes down to the point that you're making, is that there has to be clearly defined ownership, responsibility, and the ability to make decisions around that data. And that data curation is what we generally advocate to clients as they're going through their MDM solution, is that's the data governance. It doesn't have to be a big honking, you know, gorilla in the organization, but it needs to be flexible and nimble enough to ensure that the policies stay in place, the rules stay in place, that governance stays in place. That makes sense. I mean, that's generally how we approach it.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. And, you know, when you're thinking about that ownership, I think it also factors into the evolution from a single domain to multi-domain environment. So something that we've seen, at least in our accounts, is that we do see that pattern in which an organization will start with a single domain. So if you imagine, you know, we're going to go out, we're going to master all of our customers, and as part of that customer master data management process, we're going to manage all the contacts that we have on that customer, as well as we're also going to manage the hierarchies. So how do these customers fit into our regions? How do they fit into our sales hierarchies, et cetera? Looking at those other domains, you know, I think one way of thinking about advancing throughout the organization is to perhaps use a bowling pin strategy. So if you think about the classic marketing bowling pin, it's usually, I've got the same product, I'm going to sell to a different segment, or I got the same product, I'm going to improve it to do more for my current segment. And something similar exists in the MDM world, in which you can say, I've got that, you know, basically customer master, I'm doing a lot of hierarchy management, maybe I can utilize those hierarchy management skills and talk to finance. We're already mastering the sales hierarchies, but could we master things like the FP&A hierarchies, or the tax, or the corp tax hierarchies, or the tax provision hierarchies, or controls hierarchies? So that's one potential vector. So it's utilizing the use cases that you've developed as part of that discrete MDM program to expand into a new domain. At the same time, and this goes back to span and control, if you're thinking about those contacts, so you start with that customer management program, you're mastering the contacts on the account, and maybe we want to extend down another lane and look at the internal reference data, maybe the employee master, start dealing with that because it's an adjacent domain. It makes sense to go from mastering customer contacts to mastering the internal relationship managers or account managers or service people that are assigned to support that customer. So when we think about expansion within the account or within expansion within an organization, this is kind of how we look at the problem, that there's like these two different vectors that one could traverse through. I mean, what are your thoughts, Solomon?
No, and I think that's very logical. And again, it's that this is the beauty, I really think, of webinars like this, where you have the technology vendor and you have the system integrator as a vendor, because I think those two perspectives dovetail very, very nicely. Wherein, in looking at what is that overall MDM architecture, and to your point, how do you expand from one domain to another domain, and what are the natural relationships that exist there? And I love the customer and contact reference. And when you bring into those hierarchies and how those hierarchies are being managed, that's you know, very similar use case that we've had in one of our clients, in that not only is it a customer contact domain that is being implemented, but then there are one-to-many and many-to-many relationships between one of the customer's suppliers that has multiple locations, and those multiple locations have varied contacts. And, you know, as that begins to expand, traversing those relationships between a given product, a location, a region, a supplier for a given region, and the multiple contacts that a supplier may have in a region, when you begin to see how that spider web radiates out, it's a natural progression. And the drive and how we gauge, how we approach, and the velocity in which we do that is by advocating that data governance and having that data governance aspect to it. But no, I think you're spot on.
So speaking of data governance, I think your view of MDM includes that. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, bear in mind that we are the system integrator. So, and I really don't like that term, but because it's not just systems that we're integrating, you know, and that it's kind of diminishing because there is, again, a business process function, there's a people organization component, and then there's technology in the data. And our perspective when we approach an MDM solution, this particular slide, I think, really calls this out excellently, because you can see that it's data governance, data stewardship, metadata management, data integration, and data quality. And the colors that you'll note, the gold, is really the business function. And it really shows that it is dependent upon the business in as much as it is dependent upon the IT function. And they have to exist in a very complementary and enabling way to be successful. And at the heart of an MDM implementation, when we're doing an assessment or a discovery or coming right in, this is what we are performing analysis on. What does the data governance capabilities? What is the data stewardship? What is the data quality? How are we managing metadata, and what is the data integration approach? And we put that into this model, which allows us to leverage our methodology to say, this is how we can make you be successful.
Oh, that's great. And you know, I think sometimes when you think about that network of relationships that you're talking about, that spider web, we generally think of it as a network of master data. We also think that there's a network of connections or relationships back to some of those core data governance concepts. But did you also want to talk a little bit about the actual methodology that you generally implement for a master data domain? Or?
Absolutely. So at DATASOURCE, we have been working to refine this methodology for a number of years. And the general approach that we have, as I mentioned, you know, doing that discover process, which you can see at the far left, and understanding what the business needs are, aligning the data governance capabilities, and finding out what's driving this initiative, what is being looked to be solved for. And then the requirements analysis and what have you. And that's a little bit more, I would say, on the waterfall side of our methodology. And then as you get to the agile side, because it is a waterfall agile hybrid, we have these iterations of design, develop, and test. The goal is get some quick wins, get the solution in the hands of the business as quickly as possible. Allow them, you know, through quick prototyping, detailed design, iterative delivery, show them the value, as opposed to waiting to the end and then have people lose interest, people begin to question. Master data management has innumerable value, but it's important to get it in the hands of the business as quickly as possible. And through that iterative process, then we move into the deploy, and support areas of our method, so that we know that we are delivering a solution that can be owned by our client. And what you see across the bottom from left to right are the artifacts library that are brought to bear. Now, not every one of these artifacts are required in your more compliance-driven environments like banking, pharmaceutical, healthcare, where, you know, documentation is king. We will deliver upwards to 80 to 90% of these various artifacts that you see aligned to each area for auditability, traceability, compliance. In some of your less regulated areas, there are some of these artifacts are mandatory based on the methodology. Some are optional depending on the client's desire to have that more complete documentation. And then, like I said, in certain high compliance, highly regulated environments, we will deliver upwards to 80 to 90% of various artifacts. But the key takeaway here is that MDM initiatives do not have to be long, drawn-out death marches for years and years and years before you see any value. You know, we typically come in and address, and a good rule of thumb is between 4 to 6 months through iterative delivery. We're actually delivering self-enabling and sustaining components in that 4 to 6 months, and we're perfecting it during that time. But the overall scheme is just that. Understand, deliver quickly, perfect over time.
It very much aligns the way that we think about master data and the way we think about delivery. I feel like, I always remember in one of the first jobs I ever had, my boss saying that it was an IT job. He said, you want to take a manna from heaven style delivery? Just make sure your business users are always receiving a little bit of value every single day, and they'll forgive any sin that you have in deployment. That was the second part that he told me, but I feel that it's true. I mean, you do want to show forward progress, and you do want to have your program not be a death march. That's kind of not a good thing, I should say.
Oh, absolutely.
So, it's not good for anybody. Let alone the folks that have to actually march. So I guess the question here is, did multi-domain kill single domain? And I think maybe the answer is no. They exist in the continuum of outcomes. I think that would be a fair statement. Don't you think?
I do. It's not a one or the other. It's not which one is right or which one is wrong. It really comes down to understanding where you're at in your organization and what your goals are and what's the best fit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, like I said before about the forest and the trees, just because you can't necessarily see the forest for the trees doesn't mean the trees aren't important, right? So there's a big interdependence. And I think when you go back and you kind of consider the parable of the elephant, all those different domains come together to form an enterprise MDM program. It isn't just about the trunk or the ear or the tusk or the leg of the elephant. It's about the whole thing. It's just, to go with another metaphor, you just can't eat the elephant all at once. So you got to break it up into the small pieces that you can execute on to show that value over a sustained time to make sure that you don't involve yourselves in those death marches, I should say. But so I guess the final kicker, I mean, the answer to your pop culture question?
That we have both. Did video kill the radio star? No, because we still have both radio and video, YouTube and Velio and everything else. We can have both single and multi-domain MDM. And just to touch on your elephant slide one more time, and I think there's so many different levels of value in that visual communication, is because if it weren't for the communication of the monks after they've touched the individual parts of the elephant and began describing to one another what they thought, what they felt, that they began to put a bigger picture in place. And I think that's analogous to the relationships between the domains and those data owners as they begin to sit and talk and understand the relationships between those respective domains. Same thing, the bigger picture comes together. And I think that there's just so many levels of value there and how it applies to master data management that you can start small. Or if you start with one domain and you stick with that, that's excellent. If you're in the middle of a business transformation, if you're doing ERP consolidation, if you're doing financial accounts or you're collapsing GLs into one another and you have to go multi-domain, that's fine too. Both approaches are valid. Both approaches are right. I'm using air quotes. They're both right. They're both acceptable. It's just understanding what the differences are in implementing solutions when you do. Your thoughts?
Oh, no. I don't think I can add anything else except, is it master domain master data management is evolving, and it depends on your perspective, and neither perspective is wrong. Would that be a fair statement to close on before we go to questions?
I do. And I think that if, there are persons that are attending this webinar and are thinking about it, and it's an understanding of, is master data management right for this particular scenario? Is master data management right for that particular scenario? I would advocate reaching out to you, reaching out to me, and let's have that discussion, because again, 5-7 years ago, it was very rigid, 360-degree view of customer, separate product for, product MDM, separate domain for supplier, and now organizations, again, are looking at financial consolidation, streamlining business processes, ERP consolidations, general ledger consolidations, financial management transparency. The drivers for it have evolved so significantly that it is the understanding of master data management is evolving, and because of that understanding and the use cases are evolving, master data management is evolving. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and speaking of, upcoming other applications of MDM, I guess you and I will be talking a little bit more about mastering the data lake in sometime in June. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think this is
Conrad,
really...
That is correct. Just want to poke my head in here really quick because I don't want users and listeners to drop off before they have the opportunity to ask questions, but you're absolutely right. The second part of this series happened in June, Mastering the Data Lake. So we're very excited for that one. So for all those that are registered for this one, you'll get an invite to the next one. But before we go there, I definitely want to open it for questions because I have had a few of them come in. And we've got about 6 minutes to get some of these answered. So the first question is it appropriate to have only a single domain implementation? Are there scenarios that call for that?
I can say I hope that what we take away from this presentation is yes, it is actually appropriate, and at least it's been our experience that oftentimes that first single domain is really where you get your feet wet, and that's where you grow. That's where you build the internal competencies to take it to the next level, and then that becomes the first step in your multi-domain journey. Solomon?
No, I think that's spot on, and I think by starting with that single domain implementation, it will give a greater understanding to some of the complexities and nuances of your own organization, things that may not have been aware of before. And by starting with that single domain and even staying with that single domain implementation provides a significant amount of value. We're not advocating that any organization has to go multi-domain if that's not the requirement for their business. So that's the takeaway from here is that no, single domain is just as valid as multi-domain.
See,
thank you for that info. Oh, go ahead, Conrad, please.
Yeah, the only thing I might add is you ought to use a little caution when thinking about that first domain. I don't know about what you think, Solomon, but sometimes if you pick a super complicated, highly politically contentious domain to go after, just that selection can sink your program because it becomes difficult to agree on where you're supposed to go and what you're supposed to do first. I don't know if you've run, I've seen that happen to programs in the past. But
oh, absolutely. Yeah,
I'm sorry,
absolutely.
Deborah.
That's like stepping into the lion's den covered in A1 steak sauce. Bad idea. You know, you might want to think about that a little bit. No,
I don't want to think about you covered in A1 steak sauce. I'm sorry.
But I really,
Deborah,
no, I absolutely agree.
Right? Sorry about that.
Great, thank you. No, thank you for the answer. The value chain is greater for goods-producing organizations, but would a similar type of thought process work for services companies, for example, like a healthcare provider?
I'll take a step. Let me answer. Yeah. So the value chain that we're leveraging is comes from what's called the Porter model, and it's valid for not only products but as well as services. In the same way that a product organization is going to bring in raw materials and components to create a widget or some product for public consumption, services companies do import those similar raw materials. We don't like to think about it, but that's their human capital. Those are the people that they're bringing in. They're bringing in that knowledge capability. And then what is enabling that service provision? You still have that same idea to market to opportunity, inbound logistics, and what have you. You have to bring in your resources. Your resources are enabled by some tools that they leverage in their organization to produce some intellectual property or some knowledge capital that is going to get consumed. So whether it's a product or a service, the value chain model is still representative at a very high level of bringing in some form of foundational component, crafting that into a product or service, selling that, and then managing the support of that after the fact. Conrad, did you want to add to that?
No, I think that's actually very good. That is a very good description. Yeah, I mean it's a concept, right? And I think you're right. You can take that concept template and you can fill in your own business. But I think the reason why we started there was because we wanted to kind of give folks the impression or provide them with that view that a lot of those early MDM programs really targeted a specific place on that chain. And the idea is that when you start pulling back and you look at those big processes, you really are dealing with, I would say, that more multi-domain, which domains are supporting which processes, but yeah, I don't really have very much to add to that. Sorry.
Thank you both for that. I want to make sure we get through at least 2 more questions. We probably won't get to all of them. So what we'll do is for the questions that we didn't get to, we'll reach out to those people directly to give them answers. But I think these next 2 ones are really good questions, so I want to make sure we get to them. Next question, I don't see the reference data hub as one of the multi-domain platforms. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I can, and I would say that that's akin to the the reference data hub is akin to the overlay process in the value chain. Because all of the other MDM hubs, if you wanted to put it that way, and these are conceptual hubs, not necessarily physical hubs, but all those other domains are going to rely upon reference data. So a lot of times folks will think of it as, I would say, kind of the root node, perhaps, or think of it as the baseline shared data that goes across not just all of the master data domains, but also all the applications that are supported by the master data domains. So while we didn't put it on the slide, I will say that that is one of the critical things. It is one of those overlay domains that essentially supports every domain. I mean, what are your thoughts about reference data, Solomon?
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. I am a huge proponent of the significance of reference data. And, we made a conscious choice that because it's so foundational and it's so critical, that we would call that out as an overlay. And thank you for the person submitting the question that we did, if it wasn't called out clear enough, that it is an absolute critical component. And because it is the foundation to that master data management solution, that was the only reason it wasn't called out, because it was one of those foundational givens, if you will.
And it's a great place to start, don't you think? I mean, I think it's a pretty good place to start your program.
Oh, Well, no, absolutely. If you had to begin, and by establishing that reference data domain first, certainly does provide a great deal of complexity reduction as you bring on other domains. If you can reference data, I would absolutely recommend it.
Great, thank you both. One more question I'm going to throw out there. I know we're running a little bit over, so those of you that got to skip to your next meeting, I get it. But one more question, because I think it's a good one. Can you reach a point where the scale of a single domain MDM is so large that a single platform for multi-domain MDM would be challenged to meet the same capability or service level?
You know, that's an interesting question, and you know, I would say it's going to depend, right? I mean, it depends on what scale we're talking about here, and it also depends on what the actual target use case is. I mean, what I would say is that if you have a super discrete support case that you're dealing with, so let's say, you know, let's say that you're, you know, I guess in the country of China, and you're going to basically deal with the electronic patient records of like 1.7 billion people. Well, you know, that's a significant amount of data, and it's quite possible that, you know, the central point of your MDM program is just to support that 1.7 billion person master patient index or master patient, you know, master patient deployment. But even within that deployment, I would argue that you'd start to see that there's little bits and pieces that you have to then start thinking about as a multi-domain problem, because, you know, you've got the patient record in there, but then what about the doctors? Is that going to be in or out of the box? Okay, well, maybe put that in the box. But then what about the procedure codes, right? So for all of the different kinds of ICD-10 procedures and ICD-10, say, coding of the actual, you know, medical problems, where do you put those? Is that in or out of the box? I mean, so you can start to see that almost any problem that you start off as multi-domain, when you start to like really think about the bigger picture, it starts to appear as a multi-domain issue. But what do you think, Solomon?
I don't disagree. I would take a slightly different tack initially. And there's a number of clients. I loved your analogy, but even here in the U.S., there are opportunities where some customers have 1.4 billion customers or several hundred million customer records. And there are architecturally opportunities to manage that. But just to dial it back to the quick question and give a quick answer, can a single domain become overwhelmed based upon and grow into a multi-domain based on need and performance? Yes, it can. But to Conrad's point, it depends. If the architectural avenue is not available, sure, let's look at, you know, pulling that data out, because I'm sure that there are other intersections that could be their own independent domain, but it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, I guess, is my answer.
Yeah, you're right, because you're talking here, we're kind of crossing the boundary between conceptually, is it a single domain, or is it basically technically you've essentially made it into a single platform, right? It's really more like how to apply. Huh. Well, well, with that, well, maybe this is single domain killed the multi-domain star?
Exactly.
Well, I guess at that point, if you guys have any questions, our contact information is up on the screen. You know, feel free to reach out to us via email. You can certainly browse our websites if you have any further information that you want to gather about the companies. Be on the lookout for an invitation for the July webinar, which will be covering data lakes. Maybe for the first time in my life, I'll understand what data lake is, huh, Solomon?
Well, you wouldn't be alone, my friend.
Should I go fishing in the data lake? But yeah, exactly. I think we're a little over time. Deborah, thank you very much for emceeing.
Thank you. And thank you to both of our presenters, Solomon and Conrad. And thank you to our participants. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to have you join again in June.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.